Daughter of the Yellow Dragon, a Mongolian epic, Fractured Empire, Book 1, written by Starr Davies, narrated by David Wiseman, dedicated to Jack. Chapter 3. The Fox, the Wolf, and the Butter. The cleansing fires at the ceremony had burned away Mandukhai's past and purified her for a future as part of this new tribe. Mandukhai's mother had told her she would feel different once she stepped over the threshold of her marital home, that it would give Mandukhai a sense of comfort and womanhood. But as she crossed the threshold, nothing changed. She still feared this change so much, she worried she might be sick. She still yearned for a more suitable match with a handsome, strong man, not a fat old Khan. None of that would happen now. Mandukhai didn't close the door behind her as she entered her new home. Mandul Khan would follow her across the threshold in mere moments. She suppressed a shudder, squared her shoulders, and examined the gare contents. It took but a few moments to take everything in. The gare belonged to her now, not Yeke or Mandul, but Mandukhai. The prospect of living alone presented a certain appeal, even if the Khan could enter at his whim, yet also felt incredibly lonely. The expectation would be that she would fill this gare with children, but if the prospect of sharing a bed with Mandul Khan lacked appeal before laying eyes on him, it lost any potential charm after she saw him in the gathering tent. The first thing she noticed upon entering her gare was the complete lack of adornment compared to what she'd seen in Yeke's. The poles holding up the lashings of the roof were simple and sturdy, making her home significantly easier to move, unlike Yeke's. The poles were smooth, but unpainted or uncarved, which was fine by Mandukhai. She would decorate it to her own taste. The lattice wall remained visible. Simple rugs covered the floor, nothing nearly as stunning as those on Yeke's floor. The muted browns and worn whites had a mismatched pattern that reminded her of home. In the center of the gare, a warming fire burned low, with smoke rising up the narrow smokestack and billowing out the crown of the gare. The scent of burning wood served as another reminder of the life she left behind. Mandukhai glanced at the bed, fresh and unused. Her stomach twisted in painful knots as she considered what would soon happen there. Her face heated. On the north wall of the tent, a wooden altar held only the incense burner and a box containing the scented sticks to set aflame and cleanse the room. Beside the altar, a set of shelves held a meager supply of wooden bowls and porcelain teacups. Mandukhai picked up one of the cups and ran her finger along the blue flower painted into the white before setting it back down. At the foot of the bed, the chest Mandukhai had brought along sat closed. She rushed over and kneeled in front of it, brushing a finger over the latch. Then she opened the lid as someone entered behind her. Everything within the chest had been neatly folded and arranged. Someone had gone through her things. The contents of the chest were meager. Fresh deals, a couple of belts, trousers, and a winter sheepskin coat lined with fur. Either Mandukhai or her mother had made everything in the chest. As she rummaged through the contents, her heart beat harder against her ribs. When she realized why, Mandukhai's heart leapt into her throat. Something was missing. Sucking in panicked breaths that tasted like campfire, Mandukhai shoved around the contents of the chest, hoping to feel the smooth wood of her bow or the horn handle of the hunting knife her father had given her. After a moment, she came up empty and sank further back on her heels. Tears stung her eyes as a presence loomed near the doorway. Mandukhai licked her lips, gazing past Mandul near the door to the hooks behind him. desperately praying someone had hung it for her. But the hooks were bare. No rules existed stating that the Khan's wife couldn't have weapons or couldn't fight. Mandul cleared his throat, just inside the doorway. Mandukhai jumped to her feet, unable to suppress the concern pressing against her chest and the weight of what this night would bring. Mandul Khan was older than her by at least 20 years, and while the age difference was nothing unusual and didn't matter to Mandukhai, the health in which he kept himself did. Sure, most men his age had weathered skin, but they also had the form and strength of men used to battle. The roundness of Mandul's belly had made Mandukhai wonder, when was the last time Mandul had even ridden into battle? "Sign by Newell, Lady Mandukhai," Mandul said, his voice a pitch higher than she had expected from a man his size. "Hello, Lady Mandukhai," he had said. Mandukhai flipped the chest closed, adjusted the shifting bhakta, and folded her hands together in the sleeves of her deal. Heat flooded her cheeks, and a bundle of nervous energy writhed in her stomach. "I'm going to be sick," she thought miserably. "Sign by Newell, Mandul Khan." Mandukhai hardly managed to get the words out. A shadow fell across the doorway, and Mandukhai glanced over to find Yeke with her hands folded in the sleeves of her deal and her back straight, chin held high. Without a word, Yeke reached out and glared at Mandukhai as she pulled the door shut, leaving the two of them wholly and frighteningly alone. Mandukhai knew what they expected of her, but she didn't have the courage to follow through. The idea of this man mating with her made Mandukhai's stomach twist with a fresh wave of nausea. How would she ever get through this? Mandukhai immediately shuffled toward the shelves to retrieve a cup and offer Mandul a drink. Then she realized she had nothing. "I apologize, my Lord Khan. It seems I have no food or drink to offer." Had Yeke intentionally left Mandukhai with nothing to offer? The admission filled Mandukhai with shame. After placing his Turtsog hat on the table beside the door, Mandul lumbered awkwardly around the gare toward her. "You worry unduly," Mandul said. He offered her a horsehide container, which Mandukhai graciously accepted, giving a careful bow so her bhakta didn't shift again. Up close, she could smell his sweat. "You seem distressed," he said, as she poured a cup of irog for each of them. "I would like to put you at ease." Mandukhai offered Mandul the cup in her right palm, struggling to keep from shaking. He thanked her as he accepted the cup. At least he had manners. That had to be worth something. "I seem to have lost my bow and hunting knife since arriving," said Mandukhai, retrieving her own cup. She was careful to choose her words so as not to accuse anyone of stealing her possessions. Such an offense could cost someone their life, and she had no proof of who may have done so. Mandul watched her with curiosity, and it only took a moment for her to realize what he sought. Her throat clenched, and she swallowed hard. "I have a duty to uphold, no matter how much I don't want to." "Please," she said, motioning him to sit on the only seat in the gare, the bed. Would she ever be able to drink this irog without throwing up on him? Her stomach surely would hold nothing down the way it revolted against her. The first drink belonged to the hostess, and it would be rude of him to do so first. Mandukhai sank down, nearly collapsing as her legs betrayed her, and steeled herself as best she could, aware of the space she occupied, and kept her arms tucked close to her body. Once settled, Mandukhai took the tiniest of sips. The slightly sour taste quickly became overpowered by the bite of the alcohol. Mandul grinned and sank down beside her. The bed shifted toward him under his weight, forcing Mandukhai to steady herself to keep from falling against him. He sipped his own drink. For several long moments neither of them spoke a word, making it difficult for Mandukhai to keep her mind from drifting to her duty. While she could choose the terms of their engagement, the expectation that she complete the act today weighed on her shoulders. Whether by her choice, it had to be done, and once it was done, she could play the games of engagement to keep him from pressing further advances without her explicit permission. It must be done. Your bow. What need do you have for a bow now? Mandul asked, breaking the silence, clearly seeking some sort of way to initiate a conversation with her. His weight made the bed sink deeper as he shifted closer to her, and Mandukhai had to adjust her own position again. You are wife of the Khan. I am Mongol. Mandukhai set her cup on the table beside the stove. Wife of the Khan or not, what sort of Mongol would I be without a bow? I need it to protect our children. Mandul laughed with a hearty mirth, a sound that made the eye-rog in her stomach curdle. I like you, he declared. Should I be relieved? She wondered. I will see what happened to your bow, Mandul said. Later. But right now he had other ideas on what he would do. Mandukhai's entire body trembled, and she could hear her own pulse thrashing in her ears. It took every ounce of strength she could muster to keep her back straight and lift the bhakta off her head. It must be done. Carefully, she set the headdress on the chest beside the foot of the bed. When she turned her attention back to Mandul, his hungry gaze devoured every inch of her, lingering on the exposed skin along her neck. I hear there is a feast in my honor today, said Mandukhai, attempting to delay the inevitable. Later, he said, then downed the rest of his eye-rog and set the cup on the table, along with gifts to decorate our new home. Our new home. Mandul slid his hand along the nape of Mandukhai's neck. She gracefully pulled away to pick up his empty cup to refill it, heart thumping. He snatched her wrist, eased her back, and took the cup, returning it to the table. Mandukhai wanted to protest, but could do little more than part her lips. Words failed her. What could she say? Mandul pulled her into his lap. Surely he could feel how much she trembled. We can have our fill of food and drink later, said Mandul. Later. She was beginning to loathe that word. Mandul did not waste a moment more getting started. He unfastened her belt. The metal thumped against the brown rug in front of the bed. Right now, I have other hungers. Mandukhai grew certain her heart would explode. She was not ready for this. What would it feel like? Would it hurt? Would he be rough and insistent? Or gentle? No, she couldn't do this. There had to be a way out. Mandukhai slid off his lap as his rough lips grazed the burning hot skin of her neck. Race the horse across the steppe, and the horse will have nothing more to offer, she said. The words came out in a rush. But keep the horse at a moderate pace, and the horse will go much further. He must know how difficult this is for me, she thought desperately. Mandul frowned. holding Mandukhai's hand tight until she reached up with her free hand and started unfastening her deal. Her fingers fumbled. Could he tell? Her mother had told her it was best to get the first time over with quickly, but she couldn't bring herself to begin. She needed to draw this out. Again, he grinned at her, but this grin differed from the last. It reminded her of a wolf on the hunt, ready to spring into action against its prey. His hand slipped out of hers. "Have you realized yet, my Lord Khan, how similar our names are?" Mandukhai asked as she loosened her deal, careful to expose just a touch more skin without showing too much. Hopefully, his anticipation would hold him off a bit longer. "Rising and ascending?"
"The spirit of Genghis Khan has brought us together,"
said Mandul, practically chomping at the bit for what was to come. But Mandukhai took her time. "It must be done." "It was no mistake," she agreed, turning her back to him as she slipped the deal off, leaving her in just the robe beneath. "We were meant to meet in this place, my Lord Khan." The bed rustled behind her, and Mandukhai glanced over her shoulder as she let her hair fall down. Mandul now stood behind her, inching closer.
"You call me Mandul,"
he said, shifting her hair away from her exposed shoulders.
"Unless we are in official meetings in the gathering tent."
His hot breath reeked of Irog. The heat from his body radiated through her deal and seeped into Mandukhai's skin. His lips pressed hungry kisses against her neck and shoulder. Mandukhai's body tensed under his lips.
"Don't be shy,"
he murmured against her skin.
"I won't hurt you."
"Once he sees you as weak, it can never be undone," her mother had warned. But Mandukhai had never felt so weak. Her body trembled, and she could not make it stop. Her stomach churned painfully. Every thought in her head betrayed her and insisted that she run. But that was out of the question. Running away could start a war. She was meant to bring peace. If Mandukhai was to get through this night, she would need to build a wall to protect herself. And for that, she needed more time. Mandukhai turned, taking a careful step back. "I'm not shy," she lied. "But should I be so exposed when you are not?" Mandul chuckled deep in his throat and unfastened his own belt, tossing it onto the chest beside her Bakhta. Then he set to work on his own deal. "It must be done." Men enjoyed playful games. Her mother had told her that as well, as long as they got what they wanted in the end. Mandukhai could use that to delay as well. "Tell me, Mandul, are you familiar with the tale of the fox, the wolf, and the bag of butter?" Mandukhai held her deal tight around her body. "A cunning fox and a fierce wolf. The two found a bag of butter they both hungered for." Again he grinned at her, and she knew she had him on the hook.
"So, which am I, wife? The fox or the wolf? The cunning trickster or the fierce hunter?"
Mandukhai did her best to play a teasing grin across her lips, letting the top of her deal slip down to expose her bare shoulder. "You are a Borosian wolf, the fierce hunter, of course." He advanced toward her as he finally loosened his deal, but she cleverly stepped just out of his reach. "But if the wolf wants the butter, it needs to outfox the fox," said Mandukhai. Mondul dropped his deal, exposing his round belly and leaving him in only his trousers.
And so the hunt begins.
Mandukhai knew this game would buy her precious little time before the inevitable, but at least she could establish her position in this gare. Outside, Mondul was Khan. In here, Mandukhai ruled. And just as the fox outsmarted the wolf, she would outsmart the Khan, even if he managed to get the butter in the end. He was Khan after all, and she could not refuse him for long. It must be done, she reminded herself as the game began. Mandukhai rose and pulled her robe tight around her body. Mondul reached for her, but his fingers slipped over the cloth of the robe without grabbing hold. She had never felt so filthy in her life.
Come, Mandukhai,
Mondul said, patting the bed beside him.
The night is young, and this horse has much farther to travel.
The idea of laying beside him again made Mandukhai want to scrub every inch of her body raw. Mondul had been gentle enough with her, but she had no desire for him. In fact, her opinions bordered on repulsion. The feel of his hands and lips against her skin lingered, as did the weight of his body against hers. My duty is done. The feast in my honor awaits, said Mandukhai, thankful for the excuse more than she could ever express. It would be rude of me to keep our people waiting.
They will understand, said Mondul as he sat on the edge of the bed. And when I have an heir, they will forgive.
An heir. She was little more than a prized brood mare for him now. Having his child wouldn't be the worst thing. It would offer her a position of power, and her son would be Great Khan when he came of age, assuming it's a boy. Though the idea of thrusting a daughter into this sort of life didn't make her stomach settle easily. Centuries ago, during the time of truly great Khans like Genghis and Kublai, women had more power and control over their own lives. Like Kutulun, if only we could return to those days. Striving for a child meant doing more of this with Mondul, and she was in no rush. The night is young, Mondul, she said, throwing his words back at him with a teasing that touched on unspoken promises. Though, if he drank enough, she would not have to do this again tonight. I will keep his cup full. An eager grin split his round face, making him appear little more than a boy. He could be a much worse man. Thus far, Mondul seemed to respect her, and judging by the way he gazed at her now, even adored her. She almost felt bad for him, if he knew the thoughts in her head. Mandukhai moved to the bucket of water and dipped a cloth in. The water felt cool against her skin as she scrubbed at her neck and chest, as if she could scrub away the feel of his lips.
That it is.
Mondul stood, seeking his clothes with no sense of modesty as he circled the gare in his bare skin. Unlike Mandukhai, Mondul didn't bother washing up. He probably wants everyone to smell the lingering scent of sex on him, so they will all know it happened. By the time he finished dressing, Mandukhai had barely begun washing herself to her satisfaction. Her skin prickled as he stepped behind her and slipped his fat hand into her deal to press against her belly, as if a child had already made its home there. Mandukhai battled to keep from stiffening at his touch.
I am certain of it,
he said, breathing rancid Irog breath across her neck.
You will give the Mongol nation the heirs they seek.
This is a game, Keep him happy and close, but not so close that I can't insist on distance." Mandukhai forced out an innocent laugh, praying she played the game well. "Go," she said, sliding his hand out of her deal. "I will be along shortly, but we shouldn't keep them waiting. I'm sure you can explain my delayed arrival." Mondul's hand lingered on her hip. She wanted to pull away, but instead smiled as sweetly as she could. Before he protested further or touched her again, Mandukhai nudged him away to sweep her hair back up so it would hold in the bhakta. Using her arms forced him to move out of the way or risk an elbow in the face. He shuffled toward the door, slapped the Tortsog hat back on his head, and stepped outside. A moment later, as the door closed behind him, he cheered victoriously and was met with equal enthusiasm from those who happened to be nearby. The sound made her stomach twist in knots, and she turned, downing the rest of her irog from earlier. "My duty is done for now. The real game between the fox and the wolf begins."
If you enjoyed this sample, click the links in the description to hear more. Do you want free audiobooks, ebooks, or autographed paperbacks? Join me on Patreon at patreon.com/szdavies_character assassin. You'll gain access to my Discord server, behind-the-scenes updates, merch, and so much more.